Climate negotiators were treated to some surprising good news in early December, when researchers at the Global Carbon Project reported that global carbon emissions could drop by 0.6% in 2015. China and the United States, the world's biggest carbon emitters, helped to build momentum in the run-up to Paris. China announced that it will launch an emissions cap-and-trade system, and after years of indecision, United States President Barack Obama made the symbolic move of saying no to the Keystone XL pipeline that will have transported oil from Canada to the United States refineries. As the number of pledges grew during the year, so did optimism that the Paris talks will be a historic turning point in effort to curb global warming. The meeting, which took place under the heightened security because of the Paris terrorist attacks in November, yielded a landmark agreement on the 12th of December that was approved by 195 countries. It commits most countries to reduce emissions and keep warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Nations will assess their progress in 2018 and must revisit their climate pledges every 5 years, starting in 2020.
We need the world to know that we are headed to a low emissions, climate resilient future, and there is no going back. The national climate plans submitted by more than 180 countries as of today cover close to 100% of global emissions. This is a very good start, but we need to go much faster, much further, if we are to limit the global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius.
An international agreement on climate change is important because the issue is one that is global in scope, even though it is a result of the actions of a few countries. Most countries that are most impacted by climate change have played no role in causing the phenomenon. These countries say they need help from richer countries to react and adapt to climate change.
Africa, the least emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, now suffers the most from climate change. Others pollute, Africa pays, and pays dearly. Lake Chad is almost gone, and the sand dunes are encroaching the Sahel. We must not abandon Africa. Africa has been shortchanged by climate change. Africa must not be shortchanged by climate finance.
The Nigerian president urged world leaders to help save millions who depend on Lake Chad.
If that region is secured by the program being submitted by Lake Chad Basin Commission to empty one of the rivers from Central African Republic into Chad Basin, at least 5 million people will benefit, and those who live through poverty and oppression of the terrorists will no longer dare to cross the Sahara Desert and the Atlantic, in which most of them lost their lives. It is therefore in the interest of all of us to make sure that this project that was first mentioned in 1925 should be executed.
Let me remind us again that although Africa contributes and continues to contribute the least to greenhouse gases, we are the most affected, especially countries around the Great Green Wall and small island states. It is for this reason that the African Unified Voice at this summit calls for a comprehensive, legally binding instrument applicable to all parties within a global governance framework and encompasses the issues of mitigation, adaptation, financing, and technology transfer.
3 badges which are transferable. These are not
After 2 weeks of intense negotiations, the deal was almost derailed in the final hours when the more legally binding word "shall" appeared in one of the articles in the place of "should." The last-minute change in text Article 4.4 of the COP21 agreement aimed at limiting global warming by capping CO2 emissions, said that developed nations should have economy-wide absolute emissions reduction targets instead of should as written in previous drafts. Shall should have been unacceptable for the United States because that will make it a legal requirement needing ratification by the Senate, something considered pretty much impossible by its negotiators.
Le texte est très compliqué, très
The
long,
text
etc.
is very
Et
complicated
dans le
and
dernier
very
état du
long and
texte,
so on.
le secrétaire
And in
a
the
commis une
last
faute de
version of the text, the stenographers made a
c'est-à-dire
typing error.
que,
Instead of
au lieu
saying, as in
de
the
dire
two
comme dans les
previous
deux
versions,
versions
that
précédentes,
parties
que
should
les parties,
do this
comme on
and
dit,
that, shall was written, which
doivent
does not
faire
involve
ça,
the same
should.
legal consequences.
Il a été mis
In
shall.
one case,
Et,
you have an
c'est
obligation to show
feront
results,
ça. Et
and
ça
the
n'a pas-
other,
ça
an
n'a pas
obligation
la
to
même
put in an
conséquence juridique.
effort.
Dans un cas, c'est
The
l'obligation
Americans
de
could not
résultat, dans
accept
un
it
autre cas,
because
l'obligation
it
de
will have
résultat. Donc,
forced
les
them to
Américains
seek
ne pouvaient pas l'accepter
ratification
parce
with
qu'ils
the
seraient obligés à
Congress.
passer devant le Congrès, etc.
Mr. Fabio said South Africa, the leader of the G77 group of emerging countries, told his colleagues after the error that they wanted a more binding word kept in. The choice between him and the delegates saved the agreement.
Les dirigeantes de ce groupe, qui sont des Sud-Africaines, m'ont dit, écoutez,
The leaders
on
of
dit
this
avec
group,
parlementaires, c'est pas possible,
G77,
nous, on refuse.
who are South
Il a
Africans,
fallu que j'arrive,
told
moi,
my
comme
colleagues that it
pièce,
was
il m'a
not
dit,
possible
écoutez,
to change
dans
shall
les
for
femmes,
should,
absolument
and they refused. So I
c'est
had
pas
to
un
come
changement
myself to a
substantiel.
small room and I told
Vous
them,
me faites confiance.
they are amazing
Je peux
women.
vous
Look, it's not a
certifier
change in
que c'est
substance. You can
simplement
trust me. I
une
guarantee
faute de
that it is just a
Et donc, on va
typing
pas
error.
bloquer
Let's not block this
l'accord
deal
pour
for
l'humanité
all
à cause de
mankind
ça.
because of this.
Et elles m'ont dit, monsieur...
Shortly after Mr. Fabio's and the South African representatives of the G77 came back in the conference room, global climate envoys agreed a landmark accord, setting the course for a historic transformation of the world's fossil fuel-driven economy within decades in a bid to arrest global warming.
When historians look back on this day, very historic day, they will say that global cooperation to secure a future safe from climate change took a dramatic U-turn here in Paris. Today, we can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world to them and to future generations.
Hailed as the first truly global climate deal, committing both rich and poor nations to reining in rising emissions blamed for warming planet. It set out a sweeping long-term goal of eliminating net man-made greenhouse gas output this century. To reach these ambitious and important goals, appropriate financial flows will be put in place, thus making stronger action by developing countries and the most vulnerable possible in line with their own national objectives. Following the adoption of the Paris Agreement by Conference of the Parties, it will be deposited at the United Nations in New York and be open for 1 year for signature on the Mother Earth Day coming up on the 22nd of April 2016. The agreement will enter into force after 55 countries that account for at least 55% of global emissions have deposited their instruments of ratification. The landmark agreement was reached against the backdrop of a remarkable groundswell of climate action by cities and regions, businesses and civil society. All countries will submit adaptation communications in which they may detail their adaptation priorities, support needs and plans. Developing countries will receive increased support for adaptation actions, and the adequacies of this support will be assessed. The agreement includes a compliance mechanism overseen by a committee of experts that operates in a non-punitive way. The Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement recognize that the health of our planet is essential for a thriving world. But recognition is not enough. It is now time for us to focus on actions on the ground so we can deliver on the promises of these historic agreements. This will require effort on multiple fronts and at all levels of society. We need nothing less than a transformation of our major economic systems, how we power our homes, offices, industries and transport, how we live, then how and where we produce food and what we eat. especially during this season. Well, all of us here wish you a Merry Christmas if you are celebrating, and if not, we hope you experience the joy of the season. We will see you next year. Bye for now.